He had it all: the money, the power, the respect. But behind the facade of a successful Florida lawyer lurked a dark secret. Can you scam your way to $1 billion? One Florida lawyer thought he could. Today we unravel the story of Scott Rothstein and the Ponzi scheme that shocked the world. Did greed and ambition consume him, or was something more at play? There were multiple people living in my head. Scott Rothstein. What's it like to be a billion-dollar con man? Let's get into the twisted case of Scott Rothstein, the lawyer who orchestrated a $1.2 billion Ponzi scheme. Scott Rothstein wasn't always a name mentioned along with extravagant. He started out as a run-of-the-mill attorney, blending into the background of South Florida's legal scene. Then, seemingly overnight, things changed. Rothstein emerged as a flamboyant figure, flaunting his newfound wealth. Luxury cars lined his driveway, from sleek Lamborghinis to top-of-the-line Porsches. He wasn't shy about his spending habits, snapping up multi-million-dollar properties and even buying an entire street on the Intercoastal Waterway. The question on everyone's lips: where was all this money coming from? Born in the Bronx in 1962, Rothstein's early life was anything but glamorous. Raised in a small apartment alongside his sister, his family wasn't wealthy. His father was a salesman, and his grandmother even chipped in her life savings to help put him through school. This instilled in him a strong work ethic and a deep-seated desire to get rich, which, as we'll see, would morph into full-blown obsession later in life. Fast forward to 1988, and Rothstein had graduated from law school in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. For nearly 15 years, he plodded away, relatively unknown in the legal world. Then, in the early 1990s, he partnered with another lawyer and their firm bounced around South Florida for a while. It wasn't until 2002 that things started to take a dramatic turn. Rothstein and his partners opened their own firm, and it quickly ballooned. Within a few years, they had a team of 70 lawyers, some with impressive pedigrees. Former judges, politicians, even a well-respected TV legal commentator. To quote Scott Rothstein from October of 2008, "I have a deep faith in Judaism that I derive tremendous strength from. Putting on tefillin is a means of connecting with God. It keeps me grounded in a world that can easily cause you to lose your internal balance. Believe me, I have lost my way enough times to know." Scott Rothstein, October 23, 2008. An observant Jew, Rothstein was a walking contradiction. He spoke openly about his faith being a source of strength, yet he craved a life of outrageous luxury. He described himself as a true Gemini, a man of many sides. On one hand, he was a devoted family man, marrying twice and showering his wives with extravagant gifts. On the other hand, he was a flashy showman, cultivating an image straight out of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. In the 2008 interview at his law firm, Rothstein described himself and told how he controlled all aspects of the firm's management. So this is where the evil happens. Look, I sleep in the bed I make. I tend toward the flashy side, but it's a persona. It's just a effing persona. People ask me, "When do you sleep?" I say, "I'll sleep when I'm dead." I'm a true Gemini. I joke around that there are 43 people living in my head and you never know what you're gonna get. There's some philanthropists in there, some good lawyers, and I like to think some good businessmen. There are also some guys from the streets of the Bronx that stay hidden away until I need them. Does that sound crazy? I am crazy, but crazy in a good way. Million-dollar waterfront estates, a yacht, a fleet of exotic cars including Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and even a pair of Bugattis. Rothstein reveled in conspicuous consumption. He surrounded himself with celebrities and politicians, even chartering a private jet to fly Bill Clinton to Africa for an anti-AIDS mission. His office was a monument to excess: security cameras, hidden exits, desks adorned with 4 computer screens, and a Torah, the holiest text in Judaism. The source of all his wealth, however, was a house of cards, a massive Ponzi scheme that Rothstein had been orchestrating for years. For nearly a decade, he lured investors with the promise of high returns, using their money to pay off earlier investors and fund his extravagant lifestyle. People saw a successful lawyer making a fortune, and no one questioned his meteoric rise. Bob Norman, a tenacious journalist with a nose for a good story, couldn't shake the feeling that something fishy was going on. And that's exactly how, back in 2006, Rothstein's meteoric rise to riches started raising eyebrows. Here was a lawyer, no different from many others, suddenly living a life most could only dream of. Bob's investigative instincts kicked in. He tried to get some answers directly from the source, unbelievably securing an interview with Rothstein himself. The encounter was, as Bob describes it, Truly bizarre. Rothstein, brimming with charisma but seemingly unhinged, talked about having multiple voices in his head, some brilliant businessmen and others, in his own words, guys from the Bronx who know how to get things done. This interview only fueled Bob's suspicions. But for others, coupled with the fact that Rothstein was a lawyer at one of Fort Lauderdale's most prestigious firms, few doubted that Rothstein would have the audacity to live such a lie. This Ponzi scheme, in simple terms, was a house of cards. Early investors were paid out with money from new investors, creating the illusion of success. Rothstein, it turned out, was a master manipulator. He convinced wealthy individuals to invest in fake legal settlements, promising high returns. The money, however, wasn't going towards investments. It was lining Rothstein's pockets and funding his extravagant lifestyle, but no one knew it yet. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, Rich Stout, a seasoned FBI agent, was initially hesitant to investigate Rothstein. The sheer volume of his cases made it hard to prioritize which ones to focus on, and Rothstein, at the time, seemed like just another flashy lawyer. But as whispers about Rothstein's suspicious wealth grew louder, Rich couldn't ignore them anymore. Information started trickling in, painting a picture of a man living far beyond his means. But no one was immune to the subsequent downturn in the economy, and the scheme began running out of funds to pay investors in early 2009. Rothstein initially staved off scrutiny by claiming that he was experiencing temporary issues with the Florida bar, and somehow even convinced acquaintances to raise an additional $100 million. However, as Rothstein put it, the Ponzi scheme had taken a life of its own, and the decrease in new investors was fatal to the ability to pay returns to the existing investors, the lifeblood of his Ponzi scheme. After Rothstein fled to Morocco, his law firm was placed into involuntary bankruptcy, and life as Scott Rothstein once knew it was over. Finally, the Ponzi scheme was collapsing around him, leaving a trail of unpaid debts and shattered trust. But what the FBI discovered next was staggering. The deeper the FBI dug, the more horrifying the truth became. Rothstein's scheme wasn't just about defrauding investors. He'd weaved a web of corruption that stretched far and wide. Bank managers were compromised, their greed allowing Rothstein to embezzle funds. He even had connections with law enforcement, using dirty cops to silence potential threats. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of the case was Rothstein's political maneuvering. He poured stolen millions into political campaigns, particularly those of Republican candidates. This gave him access to powerful figures and a level of influence most could only dream of. And Bob, with his relentless pursuit of the truth, had been highlighting these suspicious connections all along. One associate described Rothstein as someone who couldn't even focus long enough to finish a drink, let alone manage a complex financial scheme. But for years, the illusion held. Then, in 2009, it all came crashing down. Rich's investigation exposed the full scope of Rothstein's web of deceit. When the scheme eventually collapsed and he surrendered to authorities, it revealed the staggering extent of his fraud. His Ponzi scheme, one of the biggest in history, had reached a mind-boggling $1.2 billion. The consequences were swift and severe, and Rothstein was disbarred, stripped of his law license, and convicted of a laundry list of crimes. His opulent mansion, his yacht, his car collection, everything was seized. He was formally arrested on December 1st, 2009, and charged with 5 counts of racketeering, fraud, and money laundering. He pleaded guilty in January 2010 and was sentenced to a 50-year prison term later that year. Rothstein entered the federal witness protection at some point following his surrender and has not been seen in public with the exception of several court appearances and court-ordered depositions. Now here's the surprising part. Authorities were able to recover most of the stolen money. This meant investors, unlike in most Ponzi schemes, actually got their money back. But the story doesn't end there. Behind the headlines and the outrageous spending, there was a human element. Rothstein's family, undoubtedly shocked and heartbroken, had to grapple with the fallout. His associates, some of whom were likely duped themselves, were left scrambling to pick up the pieces. The ripple effects of Rothstein's actions extended far beyond himself, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. Perhaps the most intriguing question is, what drove Scott Rothstein down this path? Was it a childhood fueled by a lack of material possessions, an insatiable desire for recognition, or a combination of factors? The answer likely lies somewhere in the complex story of his upbringing, personality, and the culture of excess that permeated his chosen world. It was ego-fueled. We were rolling, we were. We were all, me, Stu, Lippman, Adler, Bowden, we were living like rock stars. Private jets, massive amounts of money. There were lots of things that kept fueling that. As I'm sure you realize from looking at everything, there came a point in time when the only portion about it, which was money, was keeping the Ponzi going. We had more than enough money to fuel our lifestyles. It was the power that got a hold of us and kept pulling this forward. The more power, the more money, the more money, the more power. It kept going back and forth until it exploded. Scott Rothstein, 2011 deposition testimony.